Welcome back to another elementary art class with Samantha Dallett. In today's class, we are going to be starting a lesson on printmaking. We're going to talk about the what, the why, and the how, and everything else that kind of comes along with it. Now, printmaking can get a little bit complicated because there are different stages and different ways that you can be considered a printmaking artist or an artist that works strictly in printmaking. So we'll see down here that we have 4 main types and that we're going to talk about all of those types in addition to the different ways that you could be considered a relief artist or an intaglio artist. Now, because there are multiple levels, we'll go through all of that today. I'm going to show you some pictures and examples of artists that have worked in these different ways, and we're also going to finish up today's lesson with preparing for our next session together. So I'll spend today talking about all of this fun information that we need to know before we get into our projects. We'll talk about what we'll do in our next session at the end of today. And then when we return for our next 2 sessions of this week, we'll have one studio project that I'll introduce to you in just a little bit, and then a second studio project to wrap up this week in our printmaking lesson. So to go ahead and get started, we're gonna start with the what, why, and how. And some of you might have heard of printmaking before, some of you might not have. It's actually an amazing technique. And again, like I said before, it breaks up into many different areas where you could focus more on relief printing or intaglio printing or stencil work. And these are things that I'll introduce to you in just a moment. So loosely speaking, what is printmaking? In the basic terms, in the quickest way to describe it, printmaking is a way of making multiple prints of an image or design. A print being a finished piece, just how you finish a painting that becomes a brand new painting or a brand new finished piece, and you happen to use paint for it. If you're doing printmaking and you're making prints of an image, then you don't have a painting at the end or a drawing at the end or a mixed media piece at the end. You have a print. So what is printmaking? It's a way of making multiple prints of an image. So that takes me down to the why. Why is it so important? Why is it so easy to make multiple prints? So the why is that it's quick to do and it's much more inexpensive than if you were working with acrylics and oil painting, or if you were a sculptor or some other form of artist. Printmaking is a much more inexpensive way. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do, and for how many prints you can get from one image, it makes the world of difference. So if I had one design that I wanted to make, but I wanted to give it to 200 people, and if I were a painter, I would have to paint 200 original pieces so that every single one of my people got that exact same image. And I would have to hope that I painted them so that every single one out of the 200 paintings were identical. Now that just sounds very, very difficult. I don't think with my chances that I would be able to go and do 200 pieces of the exact same painting and making them identical. That just sounds very hard. But printmaking and different ways of printmaking has given us an option to make a large amount of pieces based on one image in a much faster way. And we'll see that a little bit more once I describe what these techniques are. But so it is quick and it is inexpensive. It is a means of mass production, which is really cool. Like I said, I can give out 200 prints way faster than I can give 200 paintings or 200 drawings. So mass production, and it makes prints of original pieces. So if I have one design and I make it, and that's the original piece. If it were a printmaking technique, that means I can go back to the block, I can go back to that design or that plate that I was working on, and then I can go ahead and decide, do I need to make more prints of that original design that I've created? So why is it's just a little bit easier, especially when making a large amount of your artwork. So that's the what and the why. Now to go down to the how, it kind of breaks up into those 4 branches. So we have 4 main types of printmaking, and each one of these has different examples and techniques that come down underneath of it. So we have relief, we have intaglio, we have planographic, and we have stenciling. So out of those 4 ways to do printmaking, it breaks up into even more different options. In just relief, I can list a handful. You can have woodcut, you can have etching, you can have metal cut, you can work on a plate, and so that would be relief. All 4 of those different ways to get a relief print. If we came over to Intaglio, it's still very similar, but I have more options on how I'm creating my image based on getting an Intaglio print. The same as we go on. We're gonna go ahead and start talking about these individually and a little bit more in detail as I show you examples. So breaking each one up, we're gonna talk about the definitions and I'm then going to show us some more examples. So we'll go step by step, starting with our relief. A relief printing is a way of taking a material like a woodcut or a block of a softer material, and you carve away the design that you are wanting to draw. So if I wanted to draw a sunset, I would draw my line for the land, I would draw maybe a sun up in the sky, and whatever lines I put onto my material, I then would go back in and carve those lines back out. So I'm carving away my material so that when I ink or put my paint down on my block, the lines that I have stay white. I ink it, I put my paper down, and when I lift it up, my design is shown in white lines because the material was removed and I inked the surface that remained flat. So when I lift it up, I got a relief image. So you can see here in the example I've provided you, I have the block at the bottom labeled A, and I have the paper that is being lifted off of the block labeled B. If I'm carving into my plate or into my block for a relief print, all of those white areas or those gaps that are sitting there almost like teeth between the black areas, those are the lines or the grooves that I've carved based on the image or the design that I would like to print. So you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas that are left with a little white gap. Those again are the lines I've carved. The black line that sits between A and B that looks like it's being lifted onto B, which is the paper, would be the ink or the color that I place onto my surface. Once I place the paper on there and I lift that paper back up, you can see that the black or the ink is now being lifted off of A, which is the black, onto B, which is the paper. So the relief allows the white lines to stay from the design I have. You can see here in the portrait done as a lino cut, which is a style of relief printing by Hannah Tompkins, that she has a lot of white area in her print. There's only a fair amount of black that is in here, and the black was the ink or the paint that she used to lift her image off of the surface she was carving. So everywhere she carved was left white. If there was more white areas, there's less area for the ink to sit on her surface. So you can see how dark the tie is. That doesn't have any markings on it. So that would have been one of the flattest surfaces where she didn't have a lot of engraving or where she didn't carve a lot, so that the tie stayed very flat and dark, compared to the background where you can almost see how scratchy she made it by leaving only some areas high enough to hold the ink, but the remaining areas deep enough as she carved them so that no ink would go into that area. Here you can see 2 close-up examples of what it may look like to carve into a wood block or into a lino sheet, similar to how Hannah worked on her last piece. She carved her design, and as you carve through the wood or through the lino, you remove some of the material. And wherever you have removed the material, those are the areas that will stay white in your image once you ink and print your design. Now, Intaglio is very similar to your relief printing or relief printing ways, except it is reversed. So in relief, you carved your design or your lines out and they stayed white because you printed that top flat surface. With Intaglio, you have your material that you're working on, your plate, your block, and it is carved away. And then when you ink it, the ink is actually going to fall inside of those holes or those grooves. So the ink fills up your grooves, you wipe away the surface so it stays clean, and then when you put your paper down and you lift it up, where the grooves were holding the ink, your lines are then shown. So instead of a relief having it inked and printed to show the design in white lines with your color all the way around it, your Intaglio prints are reversed. The material's carved away, the grooves hold the ink, and the only the design is then shown, nothing in the background. So only where your lines were placed and where you carved your marks holds the ink, and that is the only thing that is shown. So the design actually gets printed in the Intaglio, where the design is shown in your reliefs. We can see that in the few examples that I have where the reliefs had white lines in them where it was lifted, and that's where they carved out. And in the Intaglio, we'll see that the design is actually in black, and it almost looks like someone took a pencil to make your Intaglio prints. Again, being the opposite of what relief is, you can see that we again have our block all the way at the top. It says depressions are engraved or etched into a flat printing plate. Again, this is not to scale, it says that there, but you can see how those big, flat, deep sections would be the lines that you carve. The plate is then inked, as shown in the second example down. The third one down is that you would wipe it off. So you can see how there's that black layer in that second plate where it goes all the way side to side and there's no gaps. When you move one more down, you can see that that top black line connecting left to right is no longer there, and that there are 3 separate black sections. The paper is then placed and you are pressing or rolling your piece so that the ink is then lifted from the paper out of those grooves and that the image is staying onto your piece. Again, the opposite of your reliefs. Before, your grooves stayed white, and in this case, your grooves are filling with ink and releasing your image. Here we can see a plate and in its comparison, the print that came from it. And this is an example from Rembrandt. It is Virgin with a Child and Cat, and it is the original copper etching plate. So that top piece that we see where we have the original drawing, she is actually facing the opposite direction than she is in the print. So she was printed and it almost reversed the image or flipped the image. That top piece, you can see all of his dark lines and how they're mirrored in that print as the ink filled up those lines, and he kept the surface of it clean, so he has his darkest darks and his lightest lights in this print. In Planographic Prints, you have no carving. You're not removing any of your material or getting rid of any of the material. The way that you're affecting the surface of your plate or your block is by using your design and keeping it flat on the surface. It's more of a mix between chemicals because you're drawing on your plate with a waxy crayon or an oily crayon, and then when you put your water on top, it creates like a film. So you have more chemical reaction here instead of carving. Which is the biggest difference between our planographic prints and our Intaglio or our relief prints. This is a print done by Oliver Metz. It's from Stone Lithography, and you can see down on the right hand side where it says lost stone lithography 1 out of 6. That means 1 out of 6. This is the first print he made out of a series of 6 prints off of this exact image. So we can see how you can make multiples. He made more than just one print, and in the name, when he labeled it, he chose to identify this one as the first one out of his series of 6. We can also see that this is one of our planographic methods. It is lithography, which focuses more on the imbalance between oil and water and the images that are being put onto the plate instead of carved into the block or the plate that you're placing your design. Once inked, it then comes up almost in a sticky way, and I'll show you an example of that now. The video you just saw was me making mono prints off of a lithography plate that I had already printed. This is the first print I had gotten from that lithography plate, and you can see that both octopus from this image compared to the video came out very similarly. They are identical prints because they're based off of the same plate. I was able to get these markings on the plate by using different crayons and waxy materials to create the image instead of carving or damaging the surface where the lines would then be picked up in ink. This was more of a flat surfaced piece where I focused more on doing a planographic method such as lithography. Now, stencil is the last form of printmaking that we're going to be talking again out of the 4 most basic types of printmaking. So stencil, it's kind of in the name. You would be creating a stencil and then using that as your design to make your image. So here we can say it's cutting a design into a thin material where you then ink or paint around the design, which is going to release up into the paper as you lift it off, or when you remove your stencil, only the areas around your design would show the paint. So think about using your stencils when you're making a perfect circle, or if you're coloring in little shapes, or you have those stencils of letters to help your letters look more accurate. Those stencils are a type of printmaking because you're only inking in between the areas that you've created the design in. So I'll show you a few examples of these as well. And stencils is huge in the world of graffiti and street art, and also artists who paint murals and paint on the sides of buildings and stuff like that. They use a lot of stenciling as a form of printmaking in their art pieces. Artists such as C215 who practice and work in the public eye make art on the sides of buildings and on door frames such as this in their practice of graffiti. And even though they are working on much larger scales such as mural work, they are still using that stenciling technique, which is rooted back to printmaking. Acting as an inspiration to our artist before, C215, Banksy in the United Kingdom has also used stencil work and this method of printmaking in his street art or graffiti work as well. All right, so we just went over a lot of information and we broke down what printmaking was and the 4 types that it can come in, or 4 types of printmaking that you can do. It was a lot of information, but we got through it. We went through a ton of awesome examples. You saw some demos of how your carving would actually work or how the lifting of your prints would work. And now we're going to take this and modify it into something that we can do with materials that we have at home. Because maybe you don't have a block of wood to carve into, or you might not have carving tools. That's totally fine. I don't have them either. So we're going to find a way to use a printmaking method in or with materials that we have at home and that we can manage with no problem at all. But before we do that, and before I tell you too much more on what our next project will be, which will be in our next session, I'm going to go ahead and cover what monotypes are. Now again, these are loosely speaking, but a monotype would be that it provides usually one acceptable print. So mono means to have one of something. And if I had colors randomly on a sheet of paper in front of me and I was able to ink or pull that up, I can only do that one time unless I went back to the original sheet and added more colors. So you can make multiple monotypes Which brings me down here, and it says that it can make reprinting possible. So yes, we're getting one acceptable print, but that means we can go in there and we can alter the plate that we carved onto, or we can add different colors to our flat surface, and we can reprint as many as we'd like, having new individual pieces that are acceptable as one unique print. Coming down here, we can also see that we're going to be using either a paint or an ink, and as it is applied to our smooth surface or unaltered surface, we are then going to press it, which is the applying of our paper. And then as we lift the paper, it's going to reveal our unique monoprint or unique one-of-a-kind design or image. To go ahead and introduce our project that we'll be doing in our next session together, I want to go ahead and start here. We are going to be making marker monoprints, which will be very similar to those monotypes that we just discussed. So our marker monoprints, they're going to be very watered down, and so I'd like to call them our abstract watery designs. We're going to have a lot of freedom here with the colors mixing and stuff like that, and it's also going to be very similar to the way you would use watercolors as you let the colors kind of blend together and move from one area of your piece to another. As we print these in the way that we'll make them, it's going to be in a printing way. We are going to be able to see how our paper is lifting the image up and revealing itself as a unique print. So with that, it's going to be our one-of-a-kind, very abstract and colorful prints. The materials that we are going to need for our next session to make our marker monoprints are going to be first a Ziploc or a clear plastic sandwich bag of some kind. Now, if you don't have a sandwich bag at your house or you don't have any clear Ziploc baggies, think about maybe using the plastic Publix bags or plastic shopping bags, something that is plastic that would hold water and that you could wipe a little bit of water off of. So I would say definitely do a plastic sandwich bag or a little Ziploc baggie of some kind, and that you will definitely need. So we can't forget our Ziploc baggies when we meet back here in our next session. With that, our next material is going to be a spray bottle or a little bowl or cup of water. Now, if you don't have a spray bottle, that's fine. Come with like a little dish of water. That's going to be acceptable. All you'll need to be able to do is sprinkle or put some of that water on your plastic bag. So a spray bottle would be best. You can just give a few puffs, but if the spray bottle isn't there and you can't do a few squirts or sprays, then make sure you have at least a little cup of water so that we can put droplets on our Ziploc baggies. Those are very important. We definitely will need those two materials in addition to the markers. The markers is another third component that we will definitely need. Crayons will not work for this. Our colored pencils will not work for this. And paint is going to be just a little bit too messy for our first go at doing printmaking. So definitely come with our markers. We're going to see how the markers interact with the water and how we can lift those colors back up. Now, because we want to make sure that we do at least 5 new pieces next class that we're together, I want to make sure that you come with paper, but that you come with more than one sheet. Make sure you come with at least 5 or 6 different sheets of paper, because we will spend the entire 30 minutes next session going over and making these quick and simple marker monoprints so that you can see how printmaking is a quick and easy way to make multiple art pieces, all while staying on that same plane or block or plate. So this is everything that we're going to need for our next session. Now keep in mind, we're going to be dropping water and mixing water with some markers. So if you need to lay down scrap paper on your desk before you set up, I would highly suggest doing that. I will probably do the same. And just to have a sheet of paper towels or paper underneath just to protect your desk. Now, we are going to be doing this in our next session, but I want to give you a heads up on what our following session holds for us as well, because we do have 2 studio projects this week. For our third session this week, we are going to be doing our second studio project for our printmaking lesson, which is very exciting because this is our first week where we've gotten 2 studio projects. So I wanted to take the time today to go over a little bit of what we should be expecting in that third session of this week. Our third session, we will be doing our plant or our leaf printmaking method, which means we will have to go outside and grab some leaves that have fallen. Maybe you have weeds or long grass in your backyard. You can go and pull a couple of those, or flowers with big, beautiful petals. All of those things would be options. So for our leaf or plant printmaking project, you will have to make sure that you come with your plants, your leaves, or your flowers, because we are going to be using those as a method of printing. Now that takes us down here that says it'll be similar to stamps or to stamping something. We will be taking our acrylic paint and we will be painting the faces of the leaves or the surfaces of the flowers and stuff like that. Once we have those pieces of our leaves and our plants painted, we will then be pressing them like a stamp onto our sheet of paper so we can see how many different prints we can make from nature. With that, because it is similar to stamps, they will be very unique mono prints. The flowers you have at your yard will be different than the flowers I have in my backyard, and that's going to bring a lot of unique elements to our prints, giving us an option to make very, very cool, colorful prints that no one else will be able to make anything similar to, because they will be special and unique mono prints to you and the pieces you're making. With that, the materials that we need for our third session this week for our leaf and plant printmaking, we will need our plants. I don't want to start our day that day and you don't have your leaves from outside. We got to make sure that we come prepared with those. So I'm giving you a 2-class notice that we need to come prepared with leaves or plants and flowers, something that we can easily take a small part from and bring it back inside. So we will need our plants. You will of course need your paper, and think about bringing more than just 1 sheet so we can practice this multiple times. I would come with about 5 sheets of paper. So plants, our paper, and we will need our acrylic paint. Your watercolors are going to be too thin for this project, so make sure that we're coming with our thicker tempera paint or our thicker acrylic paint. So we need our plants, our paper, and our acrylic paint. Again, the watercolor will not work. We also need, of course, the materials that come with the painting process. We'll need our paintbrush, our palettes, and our water cup so that we can make sure we're cleaning off our brushes and using as many different colors as we'd like throughout the process. We are coming up on the last few minutes of class, and I wanted to go ahead and take it back to the what, why, and how. We spent a long time today talking about all of this information, details on printmaking and different methods and techniques within printmaking. We looked at examples. I showed you some demos of how to be carving or printing your pieces. And so I wanted to take it back to the what is it? We saw a lot about what it was today. It can be wood cutting to lino, to using metal plates and carving into that. It's reversing the entire thought process of that and then putting the ink inside of our lines, or using different chemical reactions between our alcohol-based products or our oil and our water, and how all of these different things can leave marks and impressions on a surface so that when we add our color and our paper, we can then lift an image. So we now have a better definition of our what and our why. We're going to figure out our why tomorrow and in our next session. So we have 2 more sessions this week, and we're going to figure out why is it so cool or why is it so important once we get through our 2 projects. So keep this in mind, and always remember that you have 4 different kinds or 4 main types of your printmaking. Again, your relief, your intaglio, your planographic, and your stencil. You guys have been making prints and art pieces within printmaking for probably a long time, and you just never really knew that that was the technique you were using. So to go ahead and end listing the materials that we need for our next session, make sure you come with a clear Ziploc or sandwich bag. We need to make sure we have a spray bottle or a little bowl or cup of water and our markers. Come with about 5 sheets of paper so we have enough sheets to make mistakes and experiment with, and then maybe a couple that we really end up liking. And that's everything that you needed to know about printmaking and all of the materials you'll need to show up with in our next session. Remember, if you think you're going to make a mess, make sure you show up with a little tablecloth or some extra sheets of paper underneath so that our desks stay as clean as possible during a messy project. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again during a brand new lesson, and I'll catch you back here next time so we can start our 2 projects for this week.